Hello.
Good morning, Jaleesa. How's it going?
I am great. How are you?
I'm good.
I am so excited to have you on today's episode. This has been a long time coming and it's finally manifested itself. I'm so excited.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for making time for me. And just even, considering, me as a guest on your podcast. I'm really honored.
Of course, I think for me, I've been in New York for 6 years and I feel like I've learned the most from the people that are my peers and people who have come before me and not necessarily the artists that are doing, the hugest celebrities and all those things. I know you definitely do those celebrities and things like that, but I'm just like, it's the people that are around me that I learn the most from, and I want to emphasize that just in general, that you can learn from anybody at any stage, whether it's a year or 2 years. I think that everybody goes through things and their life experiences are worth sharing.
Absolutely. And the industry is so dynamic now. I don't think we've ever seen the industry as healthy as it is now, and it's moving at such a breakneck speed that someone with, say 10 years more experience than us, have probably not gone through what we're going through in the way that we're going through it now. It changes every month, every year. So it's
Example, like
uncharted territory.
example like losing a job to like not having enough followers, but we'll get into all of these things. Do you remember, so, okay, guys, I've known Michael for honestly maybe as long as I have been in New York, maybe like about, I've been here for 6, maybe about 5 years. Do you remember how we met? It's so funny. Do you remember?
Gosh, to be honest, I really don't. I feel like I'd seen your name like in some of the Facebook groups, but as far as when and how we actually connected in person, I do not recall.
Okay,
You're gonna have to help me out here,
yes,
Jaleesa.
I remember, like, it's one sunny day on March. Okay, no. I actually, when I first moved to New York, I was obsessed. I was like, I'm gonna do Fashion Week. I'm like, I'm doing this. I came to New York to like follow my dreams, and I'm gonna do it. And James Vincent had like this Fashion Week workshop, and I signed up for it, and they did this in like intensive thing, and they said, whoever does really well in the workshop will be invited to do an actual fashion show. And I went all out in this class, and being at Mac for some time, I had like some experience with, like, being on that and under pressure and having to come up with looks, and they
Right.
ended up choosing me. And the show, I believe, was for Tumblr and Tipsy. I think it was Tumblr and Tipsy. I can't remember, but it was like a fashion.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's very sort of like Heatherette-ish
yes, like it was
downtown vibes.
it was like one of those 360 fashion shows,
Yeah.
and we set up next to each other. And we just started talking, and honestly, like, when we started talking, it was almost like we already knew each other. We just started like talking and like laughing, and I think ever since that, we just connected, I think, online, and the rest
The
is,
rest is history.
oh my god. So let's get right into it. Michael, take us back a bit and tell us about your life pre-beauty industry.
Oh gosh. I mean, it's so funny because that almost feels like a completely different lifetime ago. Well, I moved to New York City in 2008, after having graduated from fashion school. So I went to school for psychology and for fashion merchandising. And it's always been my dream to move to New York to work in fashion. So that's what I did. 2008, I moved to New York City to work in fashion, and I was working in design development at Nautica for a number of years. And 2008, that was when like the recession was just starting to really kind of like take grip of the global economy. So for people in my position, my role was very niche, and a lot of us were kind of looking at each other and going, gosh, we're watching all our peers lose their jobs. What do? Do we keep our nose down and just hope nothing happens to us, or do we start looking for exit strategies? So of course, like most practical people, I started looking at other areas of the industry. And beauty just kind of happened. I was never looking to become a makeup artist. I had never thought about it. I had never played with makeup, and it just kind of happened. Yeah, I had a friend reach out to me and say, listen, there's this really amazing, party where there's going to be lots of really influential fashion people that you need to meet. You need to go. And this was on the night of Halloween, I guess 2010, 2011, 2010, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so being put on the spot like that, I kind of had to run out to the closest like spirit store. I There was nothing that was going to fit me, and there was nothing that was going to look good. So I
That,
picked up a pair of latex horns, some spirit gum, and a cheap $4.99 like grease palette, and a gallon of blood. And I went home and I threw something together, and that's kind of what got me started in makeup.
that's so funny that that's what got you started, and that's like so far away from what you do now. It's so crazy how it happens.
I know. I mean, you would think that, if that was my start, that I would be in FX, or, at least things that are a little bit darker and, a little bit more monster horror ish. But yeah, you're right. It's completely different from what I do.
So, what was the industry like in 2011? There was a lot happening then. The towers went down. What was it like in the industry?
In 2011, I mean, gosh, it was a really interesting time. I mean, I think it's really hard for me to speak on necessarily what the industry was like, because I really didn't have a whole lot of
Yeah,
access to the industry.
yeah.
But because it was starting out, it was really tough, because I think like most newbies, I didn't know where to start. I had no experience. I had no kit. I had no skills. But I think I was very fortunate, I think, compared to a lot of other people who might be wanting to start out, because the person who actually got me started, the person who made that phone call to me to go to that party, he is actually a good friend of mine who is a makeup artist. Um, and at the time, he was a regional educator for Becca, I believe. And when I did my makeup and I posted it to Facebook, when he saw it, he was like, are you like dabbling in makeup now? You're like, don't get me wrong, like the makeup is still rough and it's still kind of busted, but I can see a little bit of promise there. So if you want, you're more than welcome to bring girls over to my apartment. We can play, you can ask questions and stuff like that. And it kind of started from there. Um, I started playing around with him. And to be honest, I would consider, I think many people are going to probably recognize her name, like amongst our circles anyway. But one of our peers, Amanda Thiessen, actually lived across the hall from me.
Oh wow.
And yeah, like literally, there are only two apartments on our floor, and our doors are like 6 feet from one another. Well, she used to live across the hall from me, but we kind of met in the hallways and we bonded. And she was trying to get her makeup career off the ground too. So we kind of like partnered up and went on this journey together. And she was really one of the first people to give me an opportunity to get paid to do makeup. So I was assisting her on a bridal job, and looking back, I did a terrible job. But we all start somewhere, right? But
Yes,
yeah,
you have to start somewhere. And we all look back on our work, and you were like, you know what? I thought this was amazing.
I mean, I'm so grateful to her for giving me that opportunity. I mean, my first opportunity doing a quote unquote or anything makeup related with her, past like, keeping her organized and washing her brushes and stuff like that, was to help with contouring some of the bridesmaids' faces. And looking back, boy, did I lay down a Snickers bar in those faces. And, I am
Mm.
so grateful that she was, gracious enough to not embarrass me and to not call me out in front of clients and to just fix my work, because I didn't have an eye and I didn't have a hand yet. So I'm very appreciative for the grace, for sure.
And what would you say? How did you develop your eye as you go along? So when I was in Trinidad, I remember Crystal Wright saying, "Don't look at bad photography because then you'd start to like it." So that's one thing I always try to remember. Like, always look at good makeup, good photography, and I think it's hard to develop an eye, because I believe at the makeup show, I think in 2014, the
Hmm.
page was saying, the most important thing is to have an eye. Um, and to have, you know, your own style. And I think those are some of the things that you can't really teach people. So like, how do you
Absolutely.
develop your eye?
This is such a great question, and I'm so glad that you brought it up because I'm a huge proponent of, feeding your eye, protecting your eye, developing your eye. And I think for non-creatives, they might hear us, in this kind of conversation and think, oh, that's so hippy dippy and that's so touchy feely. But there really is a lot of truth to it. I think for me, I don't want to say that I was lucky. The word lucky is just such a weird one because it just makes it seem so arbitrary. But I think because I already came from a fashion background, my instincts already told me that if I was going to do makeup, I needed to be looking at good makeup, quote unquote. And I know that it's very hard to define good makeup. People will try and defend, all kinds of makeup and say, oh, well, it's personal and it's in the eye of the beholder and stuff like that. But, to become a professional makeup artist, I really wanted to look to the highest standards for what the industry was demanding of makeup artists. And I always joke that as I was first starting to develop some skills, I would attend night school, aka YouTube University. I would literally spend 2 to 3 hours every night on YouTube watching the likes of Lisa Eldridge, Corin, Petrolude. These are some of the early professional makeup artists who were starting to embrace YouTube as a platform. So I'm eternally grateful for them because, they definitely laid down, a strong foundation for a lot of my philosophies on makeup.
Mhm. Now that is so interesting because I feel like some people really think of YouTube like the enemy sometimes, but I feel like there's so many people, there's so many gems on YouTube where you can learn from. Like my first ever makeup that I tried was Michelle Phan. So like you said, we always have to start somewhere.
Absolutely. And to your point, and I imagine that we'll probably delve into this because I mean social media is such a big part of our industry now. But I think that the pro community maybe had a little bit of a misstep early on, where the conversation was very much framed them against us
Mhm.
versus really embracing social media and getting excited about it and looking at it as a tool for what it is. What you take away and what you put out there on social media is really up to the individual. So, I think early on in the existence of social media and all these different platforms, I think that the pro community maybe was a little bit too defensive early on, I think.
Mhm. Now you are quite the staple in several Facebook groups, and or yeah, mostly Facebook. And I think that you give really insightful information, especially to newbies in the industry and even those who are like seasoned in whatever part of the industry that they're in. How do you think the use of social media platforms has changed the pro community?
I
I'm
think
gonna
that
say that one more time just because of that noise. I don't know why, because my thing is on do not disturb.
sure.
So now you are quite sorry one now you are quite a staple in several Facebook groups, and I think that you give really insightful information, especially to newbies in the industry and even those that are well seasoned. How do you think the use of social media platforms has changed the pro makeup community?
Oh my gosh, I think it's been so incredible for, the pro makeup community and just incredible period. I think that, we're going through this sort of like, mini revolution. It's definitely opened up channels of communication. It's definitely helped develop community amongst artists. It's given people a platform to showcase their expertise and their talents. It's the age of information. People are learning and developing so much faster and so with so much more ease than they would have in the past without social media. And also there's just less gatekeeping. For some strange reason, I think that there can be a tendency sometimes to feel like, oh my God, like, this information is proprietary and I need to hoard it. And, if I share it, then my position will be weakened. But, I don't think that, that should be the case. Makeup is for everyone. So I think it's great.
And what are some of the questions that you see all the time? I mean, we've been on Facebook for quite some time, and I'm sure there are questions that you see over and over again. And I'm like, do you ever get tired of like repeating yourself? Like, how do you feel about that?
The questions that I see a lot, number one, I think are valid ones. And number two, I think is, to be expected because, we've all been there before where, we've, decided that, we want to get into, the world of beauty or in the world of makeup and stuff like that. We're all excited, but it's very, very overwhelming, as much as, this age of information being a very exciting one, it's also very overwhelming because there's just so much information.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a lot of the questions that I see over and over are always about like kit building, and it's about products, and it's about, how to get into assisting, how to, sort of like understand what the baseline is in terms of rates, how to charge, how to communicate with clients and stuff like that. I think that these are very relevant questions and perfectly fair questions. So, if I find myself getting annoyed, which I typically don't because I remember when, those were my questions that I was posing to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I either just don't answer or I let someone else have a moment to answer.
And I'm so happy that you said that, because the reason I even asked this question is because I feel like over time, sometimes, people think that, you shouldn't ask this question. This is something that you should already know. Or, they are very like so stringent in the way that they deal with things. And I think, like
Right.
that, it's important to have that empathy because we've all been there at some point. So no question really is a dumb question. No question is like something that's just Googleable. It's
Yeah.
just I want to ask an actual person. You know what I mean?
Right, absolutely. And to that point, for anyone listening, I think that, if you're in a place where there's still a lot of uncertainties and you still have a lot of questions and stuff like that, I think very generally speaking, most people with more experience or the ability to help are more than willing to help. They're happy to jump in there. They're happy to kind of, help feed your enthusiasm. But I think what's really important is doing some basic due diligence. The way you phrase a question is so important. If you can say, hey guys, this is what I've done, X, Y, and Z, these are my observations, but I had a question about Y. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then people are more, likely to want to jump in and help support you. But, if you come out of the gates just going, tell me this, or why is this, without really showing that you've, spent some time doing some critical thinking, I think that's where it becomes an issue for a lot of seasoned pros.
Yes, I agree. Now, these conversations have actually prompted you to start your own show via Instagram Live that I'm tuned into several weeks. When I could make it, I'm like, oh, let me just pop in there. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's so funny. Number one, I wouldn't call it a show.
Sure,
Although
it has
sometimes
a regular schedule. It's on Sundays at what, 10 a.m. or 11? Like, I know you when the show
uh,
comes on.
the Michael Chua show, 11:30 a.m. Eastern every Sunday.
Love it.
No, I'm just kidding. It's not like that. But yeah, so okay. So what that was really born of is number one, the fact that I recognize that, these days, I think to be an artist, the people who are consuming beauty and the people who are really sort of enjoying artists beyond their artistry want to know more about the person. They don't just want to see shiny, polished, professionally taken images, on your social media. They want to get to know the artist. And for me, I've always been an introvert. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I've become very much an introvert. And in this day and age of social media, like it's become a little bit of a struggle for me, I have to say. So yeah, the the going live every Sunday was my effort to kind of slowly put myself out there a little bit more and to slowly get comfortable in front of the camera and connect with people in an authentic, more organic way. Nothing is scripted. Like, I don't really have notes. I'm just sitting there in my robe. Yeah, so it's just like it's just like a Sunday morning chat, amongst friends. It's me in my robe. We all have our coffee and we're talking about things that are relevant to us.
I love it. I really do. Like, if you guys have a chance to ever tune in, I would highly suggest it. Now, you mentioned you've been in New York for, is it 10 or 11 years?
This is, let's see, I got here in '08 and it's going to be 20. So 11 plus years now.
Oh
Going
wow.
on 12. Yeah.
Now, I know we've touched on some of the changes in the industry, but can you touch on the changes in the industry, especially when it comes to rates? Because I actually, when I first started the Life of a Makeup Artist page, I shared some of your advice, and actually have it highlighted still because I think it's such, pertinent information for artists to know. So can you touch on that?
On rates specifically?
Yes.
I think rates is it's a really tricky one. But what I will always tell people is that, this is a very nuanced conversation. So it's not as easy as just dismissing the question or dismissing someone with the question about, where to start their rates with, oh, charge your worth. Worth is such it's such a intangible concept. Like, what is your experience level? What does your portfolio look like? What market are you in? What kind of work do you do? How competitive is it, and stuff like that. But as a baseline, what I would always tell people is that, number one, you kind of need to know where you stand within the industry, so there is a degree of self-awareness. And then number two, you need to do your research. You need to understand what your skill sets are valued at, in the larger scope of things. And talk to your peers. See where the highest person, charging in your market is, and what the lowest is. And if you want to get really more scientific about it, you need to understand your cost of running your business. What is going to make taking on a client for a particular span of time, whether it's a do and go or a full day rate and stuff like that. What is going to make it worth that amount of time? Because you need to be making a profit. It's not a business unless you're making a profit, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think
yeah,
that's the difference where it's like, am I doing this as a side hustle, as a hobby, or is it an actual business?
right. And I'm really glad that you bring up, the concept of like side hustle and hobby and stuff like that. Because I feel very strongly about drawing delineations between, hobbyists and people who are professional artists. Because hobbyists, if you do happen to get paid, I would say that that's really more of a courtesy compensation, so to speak. That's really just a way to throw some money into the pot for your product that has been used. But if you're a professional makeup artist and if you consider this to be your actual job, then you need to be charging professional rates, and you need to know what professional rates are for your market.
Yes, that is very true. And how would you go about finding out? Let's say somebody is brand new, they don't know what to charge at all. Where would they go to find out what other people are charging? Do they head to groups? Like, how would I even start?
This is a multifaceted question. Number
Mhm.
one, I think before anyone starts to charge, they need to have spent a number of years assisting first. I always tell brand new artists that if you're just starting out, I would focus about 80% of your time building an assisting business first. Not only will it help you pay your bills and sharpen your artistry and develop your eye as well as your hand, but it'll also teach you about how to run a successful business and give you the opportunity to learn about, client negotiations, client communications, rate setting, what works, what doesn't work. These are in a way almost kind of like paid internships. You're getting paid while getting an education. Why put yourself in the line of fire before you're even ready? Um, so that's one way of understanding what the market looks like in terms of rates. And then the other way is to build relationships and have conversations with established businesses. So you understand where the absolute baseline is and the absolute top. And then you have to figure out how competitive you're going to be and where you're going to fall in that continuum.
I completely agree. And I love that you touched on assisting because that leads me into working with agencies. I know you've assisted some really top tier artists, and how did you go about working with agencies, and what would advice would you give to those looking to connect with those top tier artists? Because I think that especially now, I think over the years,
Yep.
especially with I'm going to say that again. And that leads me into my next question, and that's working with agencies. How did you start working with agencies, and what advice would you give to those looking to connect with top tier artists? I think over the years, it has really transitioned where, somebody might want to just send you a DM or comment, like, I'd love to assist you. And, things have kind of changed. I actually know an artist that sent an artist a DM, and, soon after she was like being flown to Paris. So while there are certain things that are frowned upon, like, DMing and Instagram, how would you go about connecting with those agencies and really getting that experience from those top tier artists?
I don't think that there are any hard and fast rules, but as a very broad generalization, and I'm going to emphasize broad once again, the people who are in positions to hire or to help hire on behalf of artists, it's a very it's very broad in terms of age range. It could be the person that you could be reaching out to or potentially want to reach out to could be very young. They could be in their 20s, or they could be much older and much more formal in their form of communication. So I think that, um, you have to trust your instincts. But generally speaking, I would say that you would treat this like any other job inquiry. I personally reach out to agencies, with almost kind of sort of a cover letter almost, because cover letters are things that really get to the point to why you're writing to someone. So I typically write to someone and say, hi, my name is so and so, I'm introducing myself. This is what I do. This is where I'm based. Here's why I'm writing to you. And here, is access to my social media and, my website and my body of work and stuff like that. And this is what I bring to the table. That's all that they want to know. And that's all that's going to be relevant to them. Anything more than that, they don't really want to know. So that's very broadly speaking, but like you said, other times there will be exceptions of where people have commented or slid into someone's DMs and it's worked for them. There are no hard and fast rules.
I love that. And I think that, especially when it comes to agencies, it changes all the time to me. You know what I mean? And you have to change your strategies with it. So
Absolutely.
you've had your makeup in tons of magazines, and you've been quite the published artist. And I think that, let me share with you guys, El Indonesia, Harper's Bazaar, Glamour Brazil. Like, you've done a lot. What has been your most memorable opportunity where you're like, oh my God, I'm living in New York and I'm actually a makeup artist. This is what I do.
Wow, that's a very, very good question. I don't know if I can boil it down to one specific shoot, but I will say though that it was very exciting for me to kind of get my first foreign tier one credit, and then subsequently to get my first Vogue titles under my belt. Because Vogue is synonymous with the epitome of anything and everything fashion. For models, they want to be published in Vogue. If you're a hair and makeup artist, you want to be published in Vogue. If you're a designer, you want to get their seal of approval.
Yes.
So, those were all sort of like highlights for me. But, I'll be honest, even with, I think I'm going on into like my 8th or 9th year in makeup now. And there's some days where I still wake up and I go, this is what I get paid to do. I get paid to paint faces. Like, this is literally like the most first world occupation anyone possibly imagine. You know, it's, yeah. So, I mean, for that reason, I rarely get stressed when it comes to anything makeup related. Because, I mean, look at what we do.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous.
I'm like, swatch this palette. This is my job.
I know, just makeup, people, you know, and I know that, you know, this has been said over and over, but it truly is just makeup. No one's dying. No one's making us walk children in nature, you know. It's just makeup.
So now that your business is on point, we've discussed those things. You know, you've had the covers and the spreads. How do you actually stay inspired and creative? Like, I could say, I know, and I only just realized this. You know, I worked for Mac for 5 years, and I would see so much collections after collections. Like, there was a few years where I actually said, like, I stopped wearing eyeshadow. I would be like, oh yeah, I don't wear eyeshadow. I literally would tell everybody, oh, I don't wear eyeshadow, because I just had no interest. And I just
Yeah.
did something recently, and I was just like, oh my God, I didn't realize. I don't know if I was bored, I don't know what it was, but I was inspired to do makeup on other people. Obviously, I'm a makeup artist, but I just generally was not really like, oh my God, this eyeshadow. Like, I just don't know what was missing. And something just recently clicked where I'm like, oh my God, like, I want to try this. I literally spent 45 minutes in Sephora last night, and I didn't realize. I thought I was there for 10 minutes, and I was like, oh my God. So, like, I think that you go through, like, you know, bouts of feeling inspired, and, like, you know what I mean? But how do
Sure.
you go about, like, looking for inspiration, or, you know, what do you do to get that creative spark going? Because I know how it can feel. You can get really in a rut sometimes.
For sure. And listen, Jaleesa, it is not lost in me because I'm seeing you play a lot more with like color liner and like graphic stuff and like bright. So I see you, girl. Um, I, I think it's interesting. It's going to be very different from artist to artist, but for me personally, I go through these weird, like, you know, waves of actively seeking out inspiration, and then other times really going the opposite direction where I don't want to be trying so hard, and then sometimes it just presents itself in like the weirdest of places. Um, so yeah, I think it's going to be very, very different for everyone. But for me, it's very kind of like all over the place. Like inspiration can come from anywhere. You know, it can come from nature, it can come from art, it can come from, you know, the feeling of nostalgia that I get from, you know, hearing a song from a, you know, particular time in my life. It could come from, you know, a fragrance or a smell that I suddenly come across, you know, that I haven't smelled in a long time, that triggers a lot of memories. Um, yeah, it definitely comes from a lot of different places. And also, you know, pop culture and what some of my peers are doing. So yeah, it can come from anywhere.
So I love that you say what your peers are doing, because the topic of inspiration versus imitation comes up quite a lot, especially in the age of social media. And I think it could be such like a fine line. You're surrounded by so many artists, and, you know, you work with, you know, Nick Burrows, Kabuki, like, you see, you know, these creative minds do these things that you're like, oh my God. And sometimes it's hard not to feel inspired and want to try something out. But what's that fine line? How do you define, is it inspiration, or am I just like taking this person's idea and pretending that it was mine?
You know, this is a very good question. I don't think that there is ever going to be a right answer because if you ask five people, you will get five different definitions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that being said, I think that there is a degree of, you know, checking off boxes, so to speak. So, you know, if someone were to say that, oh, you know, you're imitating something, number one, I haven't really seen anything new. Like everything's been done before.
Yeah.
Everything is, you know, I don't want to say recycled because that sounds bad, but everything is some new iteration of something that's already been done. You know, whether it's from a different era, from a different artist, and stuff like that. So no one can really lay claim to it being theirs. Um, but I think that, you know, if we were to take inspiration from something that a peer is currently doing, and there are 5 elements to what makes that makeup great, don't do 4 out of 5 and then claim it to be inspiration. You need
Well,
to be able
I am
to make it your own.
mascara, so it's fine.
What's that?
I say I didn't add mascara, so it's different, you know?
But I think, that's, and actually, this is a conversation that I'm very glad that we're having because, I think that when it comes to artistry, makeup artists need to have integrity, which I think is a major chip that seems to be missing in a lot of aspects of our industry. And what does integrity mean? It means doing the right thing when no one is there policing you. Um, so I think that as black and white, as gray, as this area is, the only people who can really say for sure if they're inspired versus imitating is the artist doing it.
Yes, that's true. Because sometimes, you're on set and they're like, oh, we want to create exactly this. And I'm like, this person is actually my friend.
Right, right.
Actually had that happen to me. Tiffany Paton's makeup was on the board and I was like, sure, I can do something very similar. You know what I mean? And you just explain because then they'll be like, no, we want to do exactly this. And you're like, well, when it comes out, it's just gonna look like, a knockoff. So, and like and the thing is it's just it could have existed before, but you just want to add your own twist on things.
For sure. And I think depending on what the request is too, it's number one, it's always very tricky. And number two, it very much depends on what the request is. Like obviously, if a client is asking for a winged liner, winged liner has been done a gazillion ways and a gazillion times by a gazillion people. So, if that particular style of winged liner that they're asking for makes the most sense for their features, for the context the makeup is going to be in, then sure, I'm not going to let my artistic ego get in the way of doing what's best for the client or best for production. But, if what they're asking doesn't make sense for that particular context, then I'll say, yeah, that's great, but maybe I will scale it down or scale it up or do a different finish, do a different angle, or, for her, she needs a little bit of contouring through the socket. There are things that artists
you tailor it to the job and to the model, and both sides win. The client wins and we win too.
Artists have to think critically and not just copy.
So we've had a lot of discussion about the industry and being creative, and I really value your opinion, and I think you're such a businessman in person, and you've had so much experience. And I personally, because it's a conversation I've been having a lot with friends privately. What do you think the industry would be like in like 3 to 5 years? And I granted that I know you don't know. I would love if all of us could be Miss Cleo, but like what?
Call me now.
Oh my God, I use that GIF all the time. So, so what do you think, in 3 to 5 years, if you had to guess, what do you think the state of the industry would be?
Gosh, I think that we're in such an interesting time right now. And, like I said before, the industry is evolving at such breakneck speed. But I think that, okay, I'm going to have to take my time with this because I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this. Number one, I think that, for a pro makeup artist and just the industry in general, I think that the position and the role of agents and agencies are definitely shifting and evolving. It used to be that, if you wanted to be a pro makeup artist, and work at a high level, you had to have representation. There was no way that you were going to get, clients of a certain caliber without representation. There was a degree of gatekeeping. Like you were only, unless you ran in those circles, you were not going to be a pro artist that worked at those levels. But social media has changed all of that. It's allowed clients to connect directly with artists. So, it's shifted the power dynamics a little bit. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how, agencies and agents evolve to meet this changing landscape. And I think, you probably know this firsthand. You're with management artists under, their social influence board.
Mm-hmm.
and that's something new for a powerhouse agency like Management Artists. So we'll see. And as far as artists, I think that, once upon a time, artists had the luxury of just being makeup artists, just showing up and painting faces. But I don't think that makeup artists today who are just starting out have that luxury. We have to be so much more. We have to be relatable. We have to wear multiple hats, and there's so many more opportunities too. You can be an educator. You can go into product development. You can be a brand rep. You can do tutorials, you can be an influencer. All of these things translate into brand building and creating multiple revenue streams. Wouldn't you say that that's the case?
I definitely agree, because I think that when I moved to New York, it was
Yep.
I already had a YouTube channel, and like you were saying before, it was very like us against them, and I
Yep.
was just like, oh, forget that. I'm a makeup artist. I'm trying to beat some faces, and I was just like, I don't want to do it. So I fell off of it for a really long time because it just wasn't my focus. And I
Right.
mean, I can look back and be like, I wish I did this, I wish I did that, but I always believe I'm in the right place at the right time, and things happen as they should, because now that I have this expertise, I'm not just, not to say being just a beauty influencer is not, valid, but I'm happy that I have a different perspective. I can look at products that don't match my skin tone, you know what I mean? And I can have an actual opinion on certain things because I can use it. So yeah, and I think, going forward, it's just like people just want to know more. It's everything is overexposed, and we just have so much product, and people want to know more. It's not just about beauty. And I think consumers are also smarter. We're talking about packaging, we're talking about ingredients. Like, people are just the smarter consumers, and they just don't want to like look at pretty things. They want to feel connected to you and your struggles and your successes, and like, so I agree with you 100%.
Absolutely. And like we mentioned, like we talked about earlier, social media has really democratized a lot of things, or just things in general. It's given us a platform to say what we want to say, put our point of views out there, connect with people. And, as a result, that has really shifted, the dynamics within the industry, because now, clients as well as agents and agencies now can look to artists and go, wow, you have something really valuable that we can't even buy if we wanted to. You've created this, you have captured, a certain audience that is so valuable to us. So it's definitely shifted dynamics pretty significantly, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And that has also affected things in the way of where the money is. Now the money is in brand partnerships. Before, it was always just about the client job in itself. Um, but now I think that, artists are starting to recognize that there is a space for them to be both, quote unquote, an industry pro, as well as someone with influence. And that is a space that I think you occupy really well, that Katie Jane Hughes occupies really well, that Mikla Wariebi, occupies. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very exciting time.
I completely agree. Now, tell us what you are looking forward to in 2020. It's a whole new decade. Things are changing. What are you looking forward to?
Well, let me first of all say that I, you know, s- going back to the point of like social influence and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm super inspired by everything that you've done, and by a lot of other artists, who have created this space, and who currently occupy the space of both artists, pro artists, and I don't know, saying beauty influencer almost sounds like it downplays what you guys do. Um, but I don't know if there's any other name. But you guys have really connected with beauty lovers in a way that artists who are just pro artists working behind the scenes haven't done. And I think I would love to explore that space, not because I'm looking for any kind of recognition or fame, but because I think that it must be incredibly gratifying to really just connect with people. Even in doing my weekly Sunday lives, I don't have a huge viewership. It's it's a small viewer. It's a small loyal viewership of like 5 to 12 people, but it's an incredible audience because I have people like Matin Malawizada. I have people like Aaron Hendrickson who drop in. People like Lottie and stuff like that. And we have important conversations that really I think make all of us think and all of us better because there's community there. I think it helps us clarify our feelings and thoughts on a lot of things that are relevant to us. So yeah, I think 2020 is going to be really interesting. I'm really just wanting to put myself out there more and potentially explore the possibility of finding an agent or someone to partner up with to take my career to the next level.
I love that. And I honestly, I think even if you may not coin it as that, I think makeup artists are kind of officially, like, unofficially influencers, because like when I see you post a Vigiat palette or like, I'm just like, ooh, like what is this? Like I need, you know what I mean? So it's not like you're just you might just show something that you genuinely like. And I'm like, okay, if Michael liked this, then it has to be good. You know what I mean? So I just think it's for some, it's a natural transition, but
yeah.
I'm looking forward to see what you come up with, and I'm always here to support. I'm going to be on your Sunday lives as much as I can, and I want you guys who are listening to the podcast to check it out as well. And
thank you so much.
How can our audience find you? Like social? Tell us how to slide in your DMs.
So, of course, I'm on the gram, as most professional makeup artists are, and it's very easy to find me there. It's at Michael Chua Beauty. That's MichaelChua Beauty. And you can also find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Michael Chua Beauty. Simple. Yeah, and I created that group, so that people can have an opportunity to, experience community, to network, to ask questions, and yeah, just to feel like they're a part of something. The lives, like I said, was really gratifying for me, and I would get a lot of DMs afterwards from people, and I think being able to do that in a group with other like-minded people is a great thing.
I love it. So thank you so much, Michael, for spending this time with us. I love that you dropped all these gems, and I think that it's going to be so beneficial for those, especially going into 2020. This is so, like, the information is just, it's invaluable, and I am so grateful that you spent your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, Jaleesa.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.